Well, hey guys, what is the secret to mental health? It's a big issue. It's something that is in the headlines a lot, especially with the recent events that have been taking place throughout the world with this pandemic and coming out through the pandemic. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about the Navy's secret to harnessing mental health. We're going to do that with Command Master Chief, retired Navy SEAL Steve Giblin. So, welcome to this edition of the Military Wire with Mike Schindler. I am, in fact, Mike Schindler, and this is the podcast where we interview some of America's most elite men and women who have served this country in hopes that you, our listener, will gain an aha moment that you can apply to your own life. So, for those that you have been following along, this is part 3 of a 3-part series. So be sure you go back and find part 1, listen to that, part 2 as well, and then part 3, where we're going to be talking with Steve about chapter 4 of his latest book, Walking in Mud, where he learned from his 26 years being in the Navy, 24 with the Navy SEALs, about how to harness mental health strength, how to harness really that mental strength that we need, taking us through the chaotic time. So, Steve, welcome back to the Military Wire.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I love this whole little series. So we're getting ready to talk about a pretty tough topic. It's splashed across the headlines a lot. Mental health, big issue, not only just in adults, but certainly in kids. I think there was a recent study that was undertaken by Boston U that said the U.S. cases of depression have tripled during this COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, tripled. That's huge. Researchers estimate 1 in 4 Americans are struggling with some form of depression or symptoms of depression. So, in your book, Walking in Mud, you talk about suicide is a leading cause of death, is the second leading cause of death in our military. And yet we're supposed to be super resilient. We're supposed to understand how to harness this. Why is that the case, Steve?
Boy, it is tough. And usually suicide is a desire to end an intense emotional distress, and or at least a perceived. Sometimes people get so deep into this distress that they're not seeing the stars through the night sky. And that's, a lot of times when people do actually pull off the suicide, it's because they don't have somebody close that's able to help them out, able to be there and to, grab them by the hand and pull them out, emotionally.
Which is pretty interesting because I want to talk about COVID, which probably goes along with the Boston University study, where all of a sudden we went from relationship, being close, getting together, gatherings, all of a sudden isolation. So that probably is a contributing factor. Yes.
100%. Especially during lockdowns when, you've got single people that are living in an efficiency apartment and, you name the major city and it's probably about a 900 square foot apartment and they're by themselves. They're left to their own devices. They can't socialize and maybe they're really social, people. And now you can't. And, and you end up in this situation where you are cut off from the world and your mind starts to wander, your mind starts to race and things just start, you start going down this, what I call doing a dance around the dark hole. And it happens. There's no doubt about it. And, people then start to not take care of themselves. They, things just, this cascading event of depression leading up to things like suicide, self-harm. 100%. And the pandemic is, I just can't even imagine going through that. I mean, I live in rural New York with my wife. She and I have gotten along what we consider to be fine. Didn't get to go see our grandchildren or go see our kids like we've wanted to, but and we have felt cut off from the world, but we had each other. I couldn't imagine going it alone.
Yeah, so let's talk about the military, though. You mentioned in the book, suicide is the second leading cause of death in our military, and yet we're still kind of a brotherhood, sisterhood, one team, one fight atmosphere in the military. We're supposed to have this resiliency, this mental strength. Why suicide in the military? Why is that such a big issue, do you think?
There's a number of things, number of factors, I believe. And I haven't conducted any surveys, but just from things that I've read, reports that I've read when I was on active duty and when I was a civilian. And a lot of the things that attribute to suicide within the military, one of them being, long deployment. A long deployment that this person didn't know exactly what they were signing up for when they joined the military. They kind of had this vision, and they were sold, by a recruiter, this glamorous lifestyle, and they get pushed overseas, and it's not glamorous at all. When I was in Bosnia, in and out of Bosnia in the 1990s, there was actually like a soccer pitch on Task Force Eagle where soldiers were killing themselves. They would take their duty weapon and go out there and kill themselves. And typically it was a young soldier and somebody that there was, low morale. There was no mission focus. They were basically stuck on, Task Force, TF Eagle the entire time. And they were there for a year. And, and then of course cliques develop and other things. So I don't know what else was happening, socially within their unit, but that happens. Then there's, trauma survivors, sexual trauma survivors. Sexual assault in the military is still alive and well. And, there's, surprisingly, we have women in the military that are committing suicide at what I would consider an alarming rate. And that is because they are, to begin with, trauma survivors until they commit suicide. They're suffering through this. And a lot of times nothing has been done, nothing has been done. And sometimes they're actually, the blame is pointed towards them as, bringing that on. And it's not true.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. So so that happens. So what are some of the common crutches that people turn to when they're fighting this depression, right? When they're kind of on this brink and they're like, okay, I'm going to go either way. I'm not sure what way. So they begin to cope, right? They have these coping mechanisms, hopefully, in
Right.
some ways. What are some of the common ones that you see?
Alcohol, drugs, and junk food. All three of them, all three of them, they just lead you in this downward spiral. And people might be wondering, it's like, well, overseas, how do you get alcohol? How do you get the drugs? You get it. And, people somehow manage to get their hands on these things. And I understand, and I've seen it. I actually met a gal that was a Army medic for an evacuation helicopter squadron, for medical evac squadron. And she actually ended up dipping into the morphine supplies for her trade as a medic. And she also suffered sexual assault overseas, when we're supposed to be fighting a war in this sisterhood and brotherhood, and your fellow service members sexually assault you. And her coping mechanism was, I'm just going to use a little bit of this morphine to get me through the day. And, one vial turns into another vial, And she was in charge of the resupply. So nobody was missing it. They were flying out every day, always bringing somebody back. Also, a lot of these soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are not prepared for what they're going to see or experience. Me being in the SEAL teams, I was fortunate. We were trained to the nth degree on, all these things that we were going to face. Whereas into, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, wherever, and you're a ground support, something's general purpose forces, something is going to give if you are not prepared. And a lot of times that's what we see.
Yeah. That's, I want to talk about that. So you did, in your 26 years with the Navy, 24 with the SEALs, there's obviously things that your eyes cannot unsee, right? I mean, just certain things you just can't unsee. So you develop these mechanisms to go ahead and deal with that. What did you do to help yourself walk through the mud, those scenarios, when things got dark mentally? What did you do?
Uh, I had to remind myself that, this is the ugly underbelly of conflict, of war. It doesn't matter where you're at and what you're doing, seeing these things, you have to remind yourself that, that this is why we're here. This is what we're doing. And this is part of the mission, and almost trying to turn it around as, we're here to help these people out. This is what we're doing. I didn't go on the kind of missions that a lot of people, view a lot of the SEALs going on, and that a lot of the SEALs were on, and special forces, and even Marines and Army infantry. I didn't do a lot of killing in my life, in my career. The direct action missions I was on, nobody died. The reconnaissance missions I was on, which I've done a lot of, nothing happened. No blazing shootouts. So I would say, as a service member, especially special operations, I was very fortunate. I didn't run into that. I have seen plenty of dead people, plenty of maimed bodies, and plenty of people that are being brought into, for medical attention, where, things were hanging out that that you never expected to see, that you would only see in a trauma center maybe. And coping with those types of things, you're right, you don't unsee them, but it's a lot of positive self-talk, and that, things are going to be okay, and we will get through this. That's the best way I could put it.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Chapter 4 of the book, Walking in Mud, you call it the standard we hold ourselves to. Why this title?
We seem to hold ourselves to a high standard. Most people do. The overwhelming majority of people hold yourself to a higher standard, no matter what it is. And that's how I grew up. And you're doing your best sometimes wasn't good enough. And then when I, in the community that I joined, special operations, the SEAL teams, doing, hey, I did the best I could. That was always a cop out. That's not a good answer. And so we hold ourselves to a different standard, and that's, when we dip below that standard, we feel as though we failed. And still to this day, I'll feel that way about myself.
Yeah, I think I saw something that said, the toughest competition you'll ever compete in is being better than you were yesterday, right? And I think, what do you guys say in the SEALs? The only easy day was yesterday, right? So,
right.
Yeah. So I think if we understand that what we need to do is just work on improving ourselves, just take one more step forward every day, that we can work on that mental health piece. Let's talk about prescriptions for healing. What I love about your book, Walking in Mud, every chapter you've got prescriptions for healing in it. And I love this. What are 3 tips people can embrace that will help them kind of walk through the mud when the light's kind of getting dim, when they're not feeling their best? What are a few things that they can do to really kind of move themselves forward?
Taking the step back and reflecting would be the first one that I could think of. That's the first one that comes to mind. Is it as bad as we think it is? And it may not be, the current situation that you're in. If it is, get some help, some outside help, some external help in figuring out how to reverse this downward spiral. And a lot of times that could just be a friend, or even a good neighbor, a parent, a relative. And has anybody ever asked you, if you ever need anything, just ask? And a lot of times that doesn't mean monetarily, or, hey, you need a ride to the store, I'll give you a ride. Sometimes it's just somebody to listen to you. Yeah. And they may not have all the answers. Yeah. Preparing for tough times is the second one. The pandemic came on us kind of as a rush, if you will. Those of us that were reading the news and were, paying attention to world events, and habitually, world events. The first thing I did when COVID was coming across and we saw that this was going to be a hard haul, I did a little bit of research and I looked up what was the last pandemic that the US really had, the big one. And that was the Spanish flu. That thing lasted 4 phases over 2 years. And that was the first conversation my wife and I had about it was, look, this thing can last for a couple of years. So we need to buckle in and let's mentally prepare ourselves for this pandemic. And so every day it was, hey, let's not crumble and, crawl into a corner. Let's lean forward into this and let's.
Yeah, you're talking developing foresight. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's so. What would you say is the third? What?
With all this time off that a lot of people have, one of the best things that's free is meditation and mindfulness. You and I were talking about the deep breathing. What a great opportunity to just, and meditating doesn't take, you don't have to be a yogi. You don't have to have a coach to do it. It's taking that time, taking that break, doing the deep breathing and self-reflection, thinking, positive think, what am I going to, how am I going to go forward and do the next best thing for me?
Yeah. It's so good, which means not sitting around the pub. That's not meditation. I call it walking the dog. I mean, that's kind of my phrase for it. I go out and I take the dog for a walk. That's my meditation. I leave the phone behind. I leave tech behind. I go out and I walk the dog. And to your point, I'm thinking thoughts that will elevate where I want to go, where I want to be, being grateful in the moment, right? We talk about honoring the moment. I think that's so important. Steve, I can't say enough about your book, Walking in Mud. This is, 3-part series. It's so important. Right now we got you frozen. You were frozen for a moment, but now you're back. So good. You got to love technology, everybody. Tech, you just don't know what you're going to get. But Walking in Mud, powerful book. Be sure to pick it up. Steve, how do people follow you and how do they get the book?
Follow me on Twitter at Giblin SP. I'm also on LinkedIn. And I've got a website, frogmanleadership.com. And the book is available anywhere online. You could just Google Walking in Mud. You don't even have to use my name. And it should come up at some point. If you're not finding it, type in my name and it'll come right to the top. Walmart, Target, Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes and Noble, they all carry it. My publisher, Post Hill Press, and the distributor, Simon & Schuster, also carry it. And it's also so available audiobooks.com if you want the audio version.
Yeah, that's great. With Steve, again, thank you for being on the Military Wire. Guys, be sure you pick this up. Steve Giblin, Walking in Mud, a Navy SEAL's 10 Rules for Surviving the New Normal. You're going to want to pick this up. It's a great read. Steve, thanks again for being on the Military Wire.
Very much, Mike, for having me. It was my pleasure.